Good morning, and welcome to our second fireside chat on mental well-being for cancer survivors and cancer caregivers. I'm Lydia Shapiro. I'm a medical oncologist at Stanford and the director of the Cancer Survivorship Program. We have several hundred participants who've signed up for this webinar, and we look forward to learning where you're from. So use the chat to tell us a little something about yourself and where you're viewing or listening from. We also have Spanish interpretation available, so if Spanish is your preferred language, please feel free to use our interpretation channel, and also feel free to write your questions in whatever language you choose. We have a Q&A, and we'd love to hear your questions as they pop into your mind, and we'll leave some time at the end. So now I would love to introduce our hosts for today's programs, and they in turn will introduce our special guest for today. Parul Somani is a cancer survivor and the founder and CEO of Silver Linings, serving as a public speaker, championing resilience, advocacy, and mental well-being. Building off her professional background as a business leader, with experience in management consulting and operational roles at startups, Parul works with organizations to engage, educate, and empower their members to better navigate personal and professional uncertainty and challenges. She authored a blog, New Job, New Baby, New Cancer, throughout her treatment for cancer, and this has now been read in 85 countries, and Parul was named the 2020 Raising Hope honoree by the American Cancer Survivor Society. She serves on the advisory board for Stanford Health Communication Initiative and also advises early stage healthcare startups. And Martin Inderbitzin, a neuroscientist, online content creator, and hobby triathlete. In 2012, Martin's dreams of a successful career were destroyed by a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. And since that time, he's been in and out of treatment to cope with his disease. Based on this personal experience, he founded mysurvivalstory.org, an initiative that documents inspiring cancer survival stories around the globe with a goal of helping patients and families to cope with the challenge of cancer and its psychological side effects. So I'm delighted to turn this over to Martin and Parul will lead us as we start today's session.
Thank you, Lydia. Welcome everyone to Why Mindsets Matter. I'm very honored to introduce our featured guest today, Dr. Alia Crum. She's the assistant professor of psychology at Stanford University and the principal investigator of the Stanford Mind and Body Lab, where her research focuses on how changes in our subjective mindsets can actually change our objective reality. Dr. Crum received her PhD from Yale University and BA degree from Harvard University. In addition to her clinical or academic research and her teachings, Dr. Crum has worked as a clinical psychologist for the VA healthcare system and has created, delivered, and evaluated interventions focused on mindset change for organizations, including LinkedIn, Stanford Healthcare, and the United States Navy. Now, I've had the honor to work with Ali on her research and in previous events, and I'm really looking forward to today's conversation on why mindsets matter. So, Ali, to begin, maybe you could just help set the stage on defining what a mindset is and why it's important.
Thank you, Parul. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and Martin and remotely with many of you across the world. It's a real honor. Yeah, so we study mindsets. What is a mindset? Well, if you think about it, at any given moment, the potential information to take in is unwieldy. When we try to understand something complex, something like what it means to age or what it means to have cancer, our minds grapple with that complexity and uncertainty by generating mindsets. Mindsets are simplified assumptions. They're sort of core beliefs or statements that we make to help organize and make sense of something. So mindsets, to take something not so, not quite, so serious right now, you might think about mindsets about healthy eating. Many of your children, or maybe you, might have the mindset that healthy eating is disgusting and depriving. But of course, that mindset is not necessarily true or false, right or wrong. It's just one way of looking at the category of healthy foods. And other mindsets are possible. Mindset that healthy food is delicious and even indulgent. And it turns out these mindsets that we hold, even though they're not necessarily right or wrong, true or false, they shape how we engage with the world.
Well, I'm very happy to take over, and it's also a pleasure to meet you here, Ali, in this wonderful scenario. It's very interesting what you're saying about mindset. So I wonder, and probably also people from the audience, is a mindset something that we're born with? Is it something fixed?
No, not at all. I mean, it's interesting. Where do these mindsets come from? Well, one thing we know is that they're not genetically predisposed. Another thing we know is that they don't sort of happen in a vacuum. What we do know is that mindsets are shaped by the cultures that we live in. They're shaped by our development. They're shaped by the messages from the media and other sort of cultural products from institutions, for example. And they're also very powerfully shaped by trusted others. So in the case of mindsets related to cancer and healthcare, mindsets are very powerfully shaped by doctors, healthcare providers, former cancer patients, and others who help us to kind of organize and make sense of a very complex situation.
So in your research, you also dive more deeper into the concept, and I think it's related to what you just said about mindsets are shaped within the hospital setting. You frame this concept of a stress mindset. Can you explore or like explain to us and the audience what you mean by that, and what is it actually, a stress mindset?
Yeah, so in our lab and our research, we study a lot of different mindsets. I mentioned mindsets about food. Do you view it as healthy food as disgusting and depriving, or delicious and indulgent? We and other researchers have looked at mindsets about aging. Do you view aging as an inevitable decline, or maybe a process of gaining wisdom and growth? But we've done a lot of research in this area on stress. So what is stress, right? Stress is defined as the experience of anticipating or encountering adversity in one's goal-related efforts. So that's a definition of stress. And we well know that there's lots of research suggesting that the experience of stress can have debilitating effects on our health and our well-being, our performance and productivity. But if you actually look at the research on stress, there's a lot of really good work showing that the body's stress response, the mind's stress response, was designed not actually to be destructive, but actually to help us rise to the occasion to meet the demands we're faced with. So there's some research suggesting that when you're under stress, your brains can process information at a quicker rate. There's a narrowing of focus. There's the brain is primed to pay attention to what really matters to get through a stress. On a physiological level, there's research showing that when you experience stress in the body, catabolic hormones release anabolic hormones, or growth promoting hormones. So it's sort of like, working out. You don't build your muscles stronger without sort of first taxing them or stressing them first. So back to mindset, how does mindset play a role here? Well, this is a perfect case, right? Because when you look at it from a sort of mindful state, the true nature of stress is paradoxical. The true nature of stress is complex. The true nature of stress is that many outcomes are possible when one experiences stress, ranging from the very debilitating to the most, sort of enhancing and transformative opportunities. Where mindset comes in is that we have mindset about that complexity. So on the whole, you might have a mindset, a simplified assumption about the nature of stress, that stress is just debilitating and should be avoided. Or you might have more of an enhancing mindset, the mindset that stress is something that can be enhancing, that can help you rise to a higher level of performance, functioning, and vitality. Now, again, those two mindsets are not right or wrong necessarily, true or false, but they do have an impact. What we've shown in our research is that these mindsets matter. They matter in shaping our health and our performance when we're under stress. And I can go into that in more detail if you like. But I just wanted to say too, back to your first question, if we think about our stress mindsets, where do they come from, right? In our, at least in a Western culture in America, and my sense is this is true, maybe not so much, but it is true broadly speaking all over the world. We're bombarded with information reminding us that stress is bad for you. If you need to manage stress, you need to avoid stress, it's going to hurt you. And that information, while well-intended, tends to create this mindset that stress is debilitating. And as it turns out, that mindset might be counterproductive.
Ali, I'd love to dive in a bit more into what you were mentioning in regards to how our mindset and our mindset about stress particularly can pertain to cancer, right? So for many of us, whether facing a personal cancer diagnosis or having a family member be diagnosed and caring for them as a caregiver is a level of unprecedented stress, right? Like both at the onset of the diagnosis as well as in the many months, if not years to come. How should we think about stress mindsets as it pertains to, our cancer journey, whether we're the patient or the caregiver?
Yeah, so let me share a little bit more just about the research we've done on stress mindset, broadly speaking, and then I'll dive into mindsets we think really play a role in the context of cancer. So, I said, stress mindsets matter, they shape our health and our outcomes. Well, why is that? How can that be? What is the evidence for that? Well, when you think about it, it starts to make sense, right? If you take the mindset that stress is debilitating and should be avoided at all cost, what we've shown in our research is that that mindset leads people to either be hyper reactive and focused on the stress, so sort of freaking out about the stress, therefore leading to more stress, compromised decision making, and also a hyper aroused immune system and stress response system. Or people in that mindset take another approach, which is to check out, right? So if stress is debilitating, if cancer is a catastrophe, which I'll get into in a little bit, those are the two places that people go. And you can everybody on this call can think about times in which they've, gone to one or the other. And it makes sense, right? If it's debilitating, you either need to pretend the stressor isn't real or doesn't exist. This isn't that bad, I'm not going to deal with it. Or it's to do everything you possibly can to make it not so bad. And both of those responses, those it's a set of what you pay attention to, it's how you feel, it's what you're motivated to do. That has trickle-down effects on how we cope with the situation. And it has a trickle-down effects on how our bodies are prepared to respond and what the bodies are prioritizing in the body. And so what we've shown is that when we can move people into a stress can be enhancing mindset, the whole game changes, right? So you might ask, well, why would you adopt that mindset? Well, the first thing to realize there is that, back to that definition of stress that I mentioned, we only experience stress in our goal-related efforts. What does that mean? We only experience stress for things that we care about, things that we value, things that matter to us. So if I, told you that Johnny was failing school, that wouldn't necessarily stress you out unless Johnny was your son or you were Johnny, right? Like stress and what we care about are two sides of the same coin. And when you realize that, you start to realize that anything that's worth doing in life, anything that's worth having or valuing in life is inherently going to involve some challenge, some setbacks, and some struggles. And when you get that, the whole game changes. You start welcoming those stressors rather than trying to shy away or run away or covering them up, right? You honor them and you work with them. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that stress is a good thing. This is an important caveat to say. When you say stress can be enhancing, that doesn't mean that you should seek out more stress necessarily, that the stressor is a good thing. It's not a good thing to be under enormous amounts of stress all the time. Having a cancer diagnosis is not inherently a good thing, but going through that process can lead one to a greater sense of vitality, of wisdom, of understanding, and it can also lead to increased physiological toughening and thriving. So we've studied stress mindsets outside of cancer for the most part. We've worked with employees in the 2009 financial collapse. We're looking at people now during COVID and the global pandemic. And generally what we find is that these mindsets really matter in shaping outcomes. And most importantly, you can change your mindset. This is what's most powerful about that. And, both of your stories suggest that there's movement in the way we think. And perhaps that might be the most important movement that we can make when we're facing a major challenge like cancer.
So that's very interesting. Like, would you say that it's possible to use our mindset to reframe stress, like how we perceive or what we think about stress? And would you say that this could have an impact also on our physiology, on our body, and in this sense, in a way, on our healing or on our way how we cope with cancer?
Yes, potentially. That is true. So our, and again, there's different. So a lot of researchers in the stress field have studied what's called appraisal. So appraisal is essentially how you're appraising a particular situation. So do you view this stressor as a threat or a challenge? Our work on stress mindset is one step sort of removed from that. So what's your general take on the nature of stress, broadly speaking? And this is something that I actually think we need to think about how we, raise and develop our children along these lines. So this is like real preventative work, right? If we can help think through how can we create more adaptive mindsets about the nature of stress before we experience the failure in school, the major health diagnosis, the loss of a loved one, right? That change in mindset can really alter the way you'll experience the inevitable challenges that go. Now, the question is, when you're diagnosed with cancer, right, in the heat of the moment, how can you change what is the mindset that matters? How can you change that? And what does it mean for our health? So we know from the stress research that when people are in a stress is enhancing mindset, we have some evidence to suggest that cortisol levels are more moderate rather than hyper or hyporeactive. We have some evidence to suggest that DHEAS, which is a growth promoting hormone, is higher. But this is all, laboratory work. We need to do more research in the context of people who are diagnosed with cancer to look at how these stress mindsets might change their reality. What we do know very clearly is it changes how you feel, how you expect to feel, how you engage with the world and the people around you. And, I'm sure everyone in this call knows that those things matter greatly when you're dealing with cancer. So when it comes to cancer, so I would say, so we've done a lot of research on stress mindset. In the last few years, we've started to look at mindsets that are a little bit more acutely related to the healthcare context. This is work Parul mentioned. We've done some work together along these lines, and with Lydia and David Spiegel. And what we're looking at here are mindsets about the nature of an illness like cancer. So again, anyone's cancer is complex. The nature of complex, a lot of things are different depending on the person and the situation. But people generally sort of distill a mindset about it, right? Do you view cancer as an unmitigated catastrophe, something that, this has just blown up your life and is it going to cause an inevitable decline? Or maybe you view it as something that's manageable, right? This is challenging, this is not easy, this is not fun, but it's something that I can get along with and we can manage it, right? There's also a third mindset, which is this, opportunity mindset about cancer. So do you view cancer as a opportunity? Actually, doesn't mean it's a good thing, doesn't mean you should be happy to have it or positive or upbeat all the time, but that going through this can lead one to positive changes in their life, a deeper appreciation for what matters, a sense of resiliency and resolve, a sense of toughening, a sense of awareness and connection with others. So we've been studying these mindsets. Sean Zion, who's a leading grad student in our lab, and we've tested this in different cancer contexts, and we have some evidence to suggest that these mindsets really matter. They matter in shaping how you're functioning despite your stress or despite your cancer. And also we have some evidence to suggest that, again, people can change their mindsets. They can be inspired to adopt a more of an opportunity mindset or a manageable mindset. And that change in mindset really matters.
Quick question for you, Ali B. I'm sure everyone would love to get into how we can adopt that mindset. But before we do, how should we think about what stress mindset we have over the course of that difficult time? So specifically, as you know, I focus a lot on resilience and how we can build it and how we thrive from it when going through a hardship. And during through all that, talk about the stages of grief or emotional change, right? So we have that initial shock of a diagnosis, let's say, and then our emotions fluctuate from denial to depression before we start actually accepting this new normal. What role does stress mindset play in that emotional journey? And is there a certain point in time where it's okay to not have it? And when is it that we need to really kind of kick it into high gear?
Yeah, great question. I think it's really important to distinguish your mindset from your emotions, right? That, it's funny because I do research on mindset. So and I have plenty of bad days and moments where I'm freaking. My husband will be like, "You're in the wrong mindset," and it's, I think it's important to realize that it's really not like a momentary how you're feeling about things at that time. You can think of it sort of like a default setting of the mind. It's like sort of, where's the thermostat set to in your head? Or another way of thinking about it is like, how there's like music that goes on in the background of a movie, and that music could take a situation that's seemingly innocuous, like two people having coffee, and it could be a delightful, heartwarming moment, or it could be an ominous, something's about to happen moment. There's the, sort of the background music can shape the mood of any situation. Mindsets are like that. They're sort of the programming in the mind that's coloring and kind of directing you, orienting you to think and feel certain thoughts and act in certain ways. And so we might not really be consciously aware of our mindset at any given time. So that's why it's important to take a minute to sort of pause and, take a step back and start to think about, what is my core belief about what I'm going through here? What is my core assumption about the meaning of this cancer in my life? That's the mindset, right? And that might change, and and that might be, you can have some fluctuation in that. On a day you're a little bit more like, this is bad, and on another day, but it's sort of like, what's the average default setting that you're approaching cancer in, right? Is it that this is debilitating, stress is bad, it's a catastrophe? Or is it, okay, this is manageable, potentially even an opportunity, and I can grow stronger because of it?
Well, obviously now everybody wants to know, and we see also in the chat and Q&A, is like, how can we, let's say, kickstart ourselves or make that switch from when we're having a dark moment, and we all have been there, and we get the bad news and it's really overwhelming, and we just think it's too much. we feel weak. And then when I hear, okay, now I should pick up a positive attitude or an adventurous mindset, and I fail, like it can even be putting more pressure on me. Like how can somebody, or how can we as patients or caregivers, like slowly adapt or make this shift to the mindset? Do you have any practical tips for us?
I have lots of thoughts, but I'd like to turn that question back around to both of you. Maybe you could share a little bit from your experience, you know, what do you think your mindset was? Was it that way all along? And if not, you know, how did it change?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to share that I had to learn that it's okay to be not okay. And to give myself the moment of like saying, okay, now it's just too much. I need time. I'm overwhelmed. It's now not the moment to train my mindset. I just have to be sad. But then I like to compare, and I'm wondering, like, if you think this metaphor works, that I like to compare the mind with a muscle, like when you go to the gym. And so I had to learn that the mindset is like a posture. And you can change it with training over time, but you don't change it in one training unit. And so for me, it had to do a lot with making little steps of like, okay, today I just managed to do this. And by that, like slowly building up my mindset. And I found that very interesting what you mentioned before, that we are only stressed about what we care about. And I don't know how it was for you, Parul, but for me, it was really like understanding why I have to go through this illness, and like why I want to go through, what is my motivation to keep going, was really helpful to work on my own mindset. Yeah. How was that for you, Parul?
Yeah, so, you know, I think the awareness of knowing that we can choose our own mindset, and that what mindset we're choosing to have when facing that hardship is in itself a step in learning how to adopt a helpful mindset, right? Is that knowing that that's a choice that actually lives within us. And I think one way to help us make that choice and actually sustain that choice is finding or creating a purpose within our hardship. So, you know, Ali, you asked about like with our own personal journeys, how, you know, what did we do and how did it help? You know, for me, part of it was blogging and knowing that, okay, as I go through my experience, I want it to hopefully be helpful to others. And if I want it to be helpful to others, then that writing needs to be educational, it needs to be inspirational, and it needs to have this like positivity to it. And that itself then shaped my own perspectives about my own journey and how I was going to react to my own journey. So I think that combination of knowing it's a choice and then having clarity of the purpose or meaning you're going to try to create through the challenge you're going through, whether it be health related or otherwise, helps in actually adopting and sustaining that helpful mindset.
I like that very much. I just like to add, like this choice. I was also once in a moment, and that to realize that the choice that we have to choose our mindset is the ultimate freedom. Like cancer maybe attacks my body, it destroys my body, but I have the choice to decide if it's also destroying my mind or my mindset or my soul or my heart. And that gave me a lot of, let's say, power or uplifting energy to understand that like this is my choice. It's not the choice of the cancer. Maybe my cancer is spreading in my body, but it's my choice, like how I relate to that. And what you said, Parul, just struck me like, yeah, I can very much identify with that.
Yeah, thank you both. I mean, it's just so powerful. A few reactions. I mean, one is, you know, to Parul's point, I mean, the first step in changing your mindset is to realize that you have mindsets. And this sounds obvious, but it's really not. And, you know, Lee Ross, who's a famous psychologist who unfortunately just passed away this week, he was known for this idea of naive realism, this notion that we believe that our perception of reality is just sort of a unmitigated reflection of the reality as it is. And, it turns out that that's just not the case. Everything we know about perception and the way the mind works and the way the brain works is that just couldn't be further from the truth. Our minds and the way we think are interpretations of a reality, that there's always a lens that we're going to be viewing that reality through. So recognizing that we have mindsets, that how you feel and think isn't just a direct reflection of some objective reality that is the first step. But on the other hand, I think it's, to Martin, your point, it's important to realize that you still want to be connected to the reality, right? I think oftentimes people misinterpret the power of mindset as just pretend that you don't have cancer, right? Or just, sort of this like, envision the new house you're going to get and it'll just appear. Like, it's mindsets are powerful when they're connected and honoring the reality in the sense that you're experiencing, but with a soft stance. It's with a mindful approach of knowing that there are many interpretations, there are many perspectives, there are many ways of labeling, coloring, interpreting the situation. And yes, you have power over that. You have a choice around that. It doesn't mean you should beat yourself up when you're not in a good mindset, because, we do have choice, but we are also continuously influenced by, again, our development, our cultures, the place we live in. We get a lot of messages that, sickness is bad and cancer is bad, and, living longer is the only good, and this productivity is what's important. These messages are coming into our minds. So we also need to be thoughtful about how our minds are being influenced by those around us, the cultures we live in, and so forth. A saying I really love is, I think it was, somebody needs to check me on this, I think it was the Dalai Lama who said, "I never let anyone walk through my mind with dirty feet." So I think that's a good thing to keep in mind.
That's a wonderful quote. For Parul, you had a question?
Well, I was going to ask Ali, along the lines of thinking about, the ability for others to influence us, before asking the question around how that can be positive in its own way, I'd love your thoughts around the concept of locus of control and how that applies in regards to stress mindset, and whether we have like an internal locus of a control or external, and what is the power of, like, one, maybe defining that for us and telling us a little bit more about what that is, but how does that factor into whether we can adopt a victim mindset or feel like we can create something out of our hardship?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so locus of control is just a general sense of, what do you think is controlling your reality? Do you think you're controlling your reality, or do you think external forces are controlling your reality? I think my overarching message is, for this and other things, is to try to not see things so black and white, right? Reality is co-created, right? There are objective forces, or at least we think they are, and also our mindset, we have mindsets about those things. And so any experience, the effect of any experience, whether that be the effect of a cup of coffee you're drinking, to the effect of a cancer in your body, or the effect of a stress you're experiencing, is going to be co-created by the sort of inherent properties of those things, and also our mindsets about those things. So it's not an all or nothing, either or, it's both. And and so it's honoring what is, in that sense, honoring the things you can't control, but also knowing that we have, I think, more control than people think they do over our perspective, over our mindsets, if that makes sense.
Very interesting. So you also mentioned before that the mindset is a result from where we grow up, from culture, that what kind of input we get. So I wonder if we can make use of that. Can we prime ourselves to, let's say we are down, we are in a moment where we're not so like happy, and can we then just look at, let's say, other stories of other patients or survivors? Can we prime ourselves like to improve our mindset by looking at, let's say, role models and see how those people or other people are doing and how they go through the illness?
Yeah, great question. I think there are many ways to change your mindset. The opportunities are really endless. And I do want to say, I think there are different sort of flavors of mindset change. There are some cases, and for some people, where a single moment was transformative, right? Was like, oh, somebody said something to me, or I heard a song, or I connected with my child, or I read some research, and that was it. Like that was the moment that just, altered the way in which I'm seeing this. It's like, a new perspective that you will never forget, right? That is possible, and we've seen it. I think there are other, flavors of mindset change where you sort of know you're kind of stuck in this stress is debilitating, cancer is a catastrophe mindset, and you're trying to just like inch your way out of it, right? And that is more like a muscle, you're sort of working on that. You notice, our 3 steps that we teach people in our stress mindset trainings are first to acknowledge the stress, right? Acknowledge the fact that you're experiencing cancer, whatever it might be. Second, to welcome that stress. Why do you welcome it? You welcome it because it's the other side of the coin of something we care about. So you might ask, because it's ultimately not cancer that's the problem. It's the fact that cancer is getting in the way of the way you think you want to live, or the, the things you want to do, or the image of yourself that you've had. Like the thing that causes distress is the threat to those things, right? So you welcome it as an opportunity to reconnect with your values and the things that care about most. And then the third step is to utilize the stress response, right? Take this moment that might have not been there otherwise as an opportunity to reconnect with those values in an even more impassioned way, if that will. And the acknowledgement part also involves acknowledging your initial reactions, right? It's okay if you did not have a wise and equanimous balanced sort of approach from the get-go. You just acknowledge that. And then the third step is like, how do I want to be? What is my vision for how I want to approach this situation, given what it is? And for those reasons, I think models can really be key here. Talking to people, like this, right? Who've gone through it, right? Who've been there, who've done it, and finding people who are really inspirations. And in fact, the study that we just ran with Shanzian and our colleagues here at the Stanford Cancer Center, that's how we did it, right? We took Parul and other former cancer patients to just share their stories and talk about the role of their mindsets in the experience. That is eye-opening, and it turns out that was really helpful for people.
And is there any information out there in regards to the different mediums that influence can come from? Is it in whether like it's in-person interactions, reading, writings that people have published? Is there any known information around any sort of variation of level of influence and role modeling power that experience sharing can come in?
That's a really interesting question. I will say, if people are interested in the stress mindset training that we do, we have free access to it on our website. It's, sort of takes people through those 3 steps. That is for stress, broadly speaking. This more recent research on cancer-specific mindsets, that's in the process now, but we can share more of that as we progress along those lines. But I just want to make sure that was available. Your questions about the medium, there aren't a lot of good studies to sort of support, well, it needs to be, video combined with, or it needs to be written, or it needs to be in person. I think a variety of sources could be powerful. What we do know is the sort of the qualities of those sources need to meet two criteria. One is you need to judge that source of information as competent, meaning they are to be trusted with the content that they're telling you, right? Is this person or is this source somebody who gets it, meaning gets cancer, gets stress, gets, whatever the issue is. And the second is that source of information, are they warm? Are they somebody or something that gets me, cares for me, understands my personal unique needs, right? So this becomes important if you're, say, an oncologist or a healthcare provider. Conveying these qualities is the first step to being able to be influential in any way, shape, or form. It also is important in designing interventions or of any sort. You have to convey a sense of competence and a sense of warmth. You need to get it and you need to get them if you're trying to actually make a difference in somebody's lives. So I think if you have those two qualities, and that is sort of, that essence is there. It could be text, it could be a friend, it could be a doctor, it could be, and what it means to be competent and warm is going to differ depending on the situation.
So I'm taking a quick look a little bit at the Q&As. There are a lot of very interesting questions. So I tried to cluster one, which I think is very interesting. And somebody was asking, is there any research out there that shows that if I have a, let's call it a positive mindset, that I have an increased chance to survive cancer? And I would just add a question to that, because obviously it could also have a negative impact. Let's imagine I'm, as a patient, don't manage to pick myself up. And then I get fear of like, okay, now I'm going to die because I have like not the constructive mindset. Is there any work and research out there around those topics?
Yeah, we don't have any specific research on longevity and mindsets yet. There is a lot of research to suggest that longevity is influenced by psychosocial training, support groups. I know Professor David Spiegel will be on with you next week to talk about some of that. There's certainly mechanistic evidence to suggest that changing the way you cope with things, changing your mindset, can lead to adaptive responses in the body. So I think there's a lot more to do to understand that. I think my caveat there would be, we're not changing the mindset to necessarily cure cancer, right? Or to, live forever. That might be possible, but that's really not the goal, right? The goal is to realize the power that you can cope with any situation, no matter what that is, no matter how grave that is, no matter if that means you're going to die tomorrow or you're going to suffer for the rest of your life. Like, that is, we are able to cope with those situations no matter how grave they are. That, I think, is the real power of mindset, not in sort of this, I think, how our kind of culture takes it, which is like mind over matter. Well, just think you're well and then you'll be well. It's not so simple, and yet in some ways it's even more powerful than that. Does that resonate? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like very much that you're so honest, because especially in this context, I think it's important also to put the research and what is possible not into relation. And I like how you frame it. It's like, maybe it is possible to increase longevity, and so we don't know, but also that mindset is about being able to live the life you want without losing the time you have. Like, that maybe you just have 1 day, 1 year, maybe have 10 years or maybe more, but with the right mindset, you can actually get out the most of the time you have left. And I think that's the power of mindset in general.
Ali, I know we have a lot of questions from the audience that we want to get to. And so I don't know if you have any, parting words you would want to share with the group before we shift to Q&A, but this has been an amazing discussion, and I'm looking forward to answering some of the audience questions as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the last thing I just sort of drop in there another kind of thing we've been thinking about recently are mindsets about one's own body. And I think this is really important when it comes to cancer, especially. So as you're sort of doing some self-reflection to think about what your mindsets are, think about mindsets about stress, think about mindsets about cancer, but also how are you feeling about your body right now? Are you viewing your body as an adversary, something that's turned on you? Are you viewing your body as something that's capable or even, sort of responsive to these things? And so we don't need to go into it now, but I think it's just another thing I'd lay out there. But I'm really looking forward to responding to some of these questions.
So let me jump in and give you all some of the questions that are coming in from the audience. From Amy Twito, what are the steps we can take to reframe our stress mindset?
Yeah, so that I would say I would just go back to those 3 steps. So it's acknowledging your stress, acknowledging your reaction to it, whatever it might be, welcoming that stress as being connected to something you care about, something you value, and then utilizing your stress response, saying, what is my next action, my next intention, my next reaction? How can that be channeled to help serve the goal and the value, as opposed to trying to avoid or sort of get rid of the stress?
From Kamal Gandhi, Dr. Crum, any research linking mindsets with external environments, such as being in nature?
Yes, there has been some research that I think was just written up recently, but there's a number of different studies supporting the positive effects of being in nature on both mood and on perspective. I think being in nature helps you to kind of realize that sort of get out of your sort of solipsistic, individualistic view of things and realize the kind of implicate order of nature.
From Sheridan Peterson, I'm wondering how you would blend in the adverse childhood event study and mindsets with your work, particularly how this causes disturbance in the vagus nerves function and being locked into a sympathetic response. Any suggestions for supports in this area?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's been a lot of really important and good research on childhood adverse events and how they can have sort of a negative cascading effect on our lives and on our physiology. I think what this work would suggest is this is one of many tools that one can use to start to rethink the experience of stress in one's life. It is harder after having gone through a trauma and after having developed many years of coping mechanisms around a trauma to change one's mindset about these things. It's actually easier to do it sort of in the either before or sort of in the middle of it, right? As Parul and Martin shared, it was the going through cancer, being mindful, being thoughtful, taking it, as a way to improve themselves. That is the best time to do it. I say this speaking as a clinical psychologist, having worked with veterans who have, had traumas and then had many years of coping mechanisms in place to deal with those traumas. That doesn't mean it's not possible to transform one's life at that moment. It very much is. But I think we really need to be mindful of the ways that we are raising our children, helping our children cope with stressors in their lives, major stressors, traumas in their lives, and to do it from a place of not, I'm so sorry this happened to you, let's try to make it not wreak havoc, but in a way of saying, this is part of life. We wouldn't wish these things on you, but we can get through them and you can be stronger because of them. That would be my suggestion for that.
Leslie Lauren says, I found the mindset is not static. It continues to be dynamic, daily, hourly, depending on symptoms such as pain. I look forward to learning more. Eileen Raymond says, it seems that taking charge of your own illness and recovery may be important to creating a helpful mindset. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I can. I mean, well, actually, I'd like to hear Parul comment on that. One thing she said last week is that resonated with me is that, hope is not an action plan. I'm quoting you. And I think this is really important that, again, these mindsets aren't also, they're just the beginning, right? Or it's a continuous process. They're not a solution, right? It's not like, oh, well, I'm in the right mindset now. I don't need to do anything, right? So, Parul, maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah, no, mindset definitely is evolving over time. What you said resonated with me, Ali, about how mindsets are not emotions. And it's actually then recognizing that what's actually fluctuating on a day-to-day or hourly basis might actually be more our emotions and how we're feeling about something in a given moment, but that our mindset is actually that default value system that we have, and that how we tap into that might be what's actually changing based on our emotion. And I think one way to actually think of it is like an energy source for us, is that when our emotions are getting us down, how do we refuel by thinking back to what is that positive mindset, and how are we going to actually manifest it in that particular day? Are we going to manifest it through an action that we can take to feel empowered, right? So I remember when my hair started falling out, and I didn't want that to be just one more thing that was happening to me. So the mindset I tapped into was around how can I empower myself in this situation? And it was by proactively going and having my hair shaved off. So like, okay, I've now taken control of this moment, and I've turned what otherwise would have been a powerful part of a painful part of the experience into something that actually felt strengthening and that I felt, empowered by. And so it's taking those actions that either create purpose out of what we're going through or help us feel like we are taking control of a situation in what is otherwise often feeling like a very uncontrollable experience.
Yeah, it's having the mindset that cancer is an opportunity or is manageable can be powerful to the extent that that motivates you to engage in behaviors that make it so, right? And that therein lies the real power behind these mindsets.
There's a comment from Kate Quinn that I would be interested in hearing the three of you address, and it's about the power of prayer. Is there any research on the power of prayer to help shift mindsets?
Yeah, I mean, there's a fair amount of research on the power of prayer. There's, the truth is this mindset research is really in its infancy, in this specific sense. There's been a lot of research on optimism and broadly speaking, and sort of well-being and these things, but these very sort of specific mindsets, the way you're thinking about stress, the way you're thinking about cancer, the way you're thinking about the body, there hasn't been a whole lot. We're just at the beginning of all this. But to think about how it might influence with prayer, I think prayer could be a way for one to transform their own mindset, right? If there are things that you cannot control, right? Prayer is a way that you can kind of put your intentions and out into the world, right? And feel a sense of connection despite not being able to do much of anything. But yeah, I think there's a lot more to think about and do along those lines.
I'll add a personal story here as it relates to prayer. I recall the day before my chemotherapy was scheduled to begin, my family took me to a local mandir or a temple, and we were going there to pray for success in the treatment and strength for the treatment that was going to come. And yet I remember standing in that temple, looking at the statues of the gods and thinking about how strange it was that I was actually praying to the same gods who gave me cancer in the first place. And I remember feeling in that moment, yes, there was this sense of irony and frustration. And yet I also remember feeling and acknowledging that that feeling felt negative and that it felt like a negative way of thinking about it. And it was almost that clarity and that awareness that my approach to this conversation that I was having myself was actually more negatively angled, that I actually chose to have a change in mindset in that very moment. And I decided that, okay, instead of thinking it of they gave it to me, what if I were to think of it as this diagnosis, this hardship is actually inevitable? And what I have choice on is the ability to pray for strength to support me through this inevitable experience, and to be able to face it with the strength and grace that I can then later feel, proud of. And so even through the act of prayer, there can be, two sides to that, but the choice of mindset actually manifests itself in what role you want prayer to have in your own healing. And the other element of it is the role prayer can have in gratitude. And, and what does prayer even mean to you, right? Whether you're religious or just spiritual, but like the act of reflecting each night on what I'm thankful for is an act of prayer for myself. But it's an act of also practicing positivity in a way that empowers one's mindset too.
It's very, very wonderful. Thanks for sharing that, Parul. It reminds me of, like, I'm not a very religious person, but very connected to spirituality, and I'm just happy to share one prayer, or I call it a mantra, that came to me approximately a year ago when I was facing a very tricky moment in my journey, where my doctor the first time used the possibility that maybe we cannot solve it, and was using the word of palliative care, and it was shocking. And back then something came to me, which is maybe a prayer that I told myself, and I put myself here on the chest, and I was just telling myself, I don't know, but I will be fine. And that was very interesting. It was very calming, together with this hand gesture of, like, including that even if I have to die, I will be fine. I don't know, but I will. And this was for me the ultimate mindset of taking back ownership or control. And it's interesting that I use that now a lot, and it actually works a lot. It works, that it calms me down. Yeah.
I think that is the ultimate mindset right there. I guess I would just say, one thing to keep in mind is, the way I think of it, at least, is there's sort of three planes that we can operate on. There's the playing field of what is, right? That's what is the diagnosis? What is the course of action? What are the, sort of tangible things in your life that are sort of objective? Then there's the layer of perception. That's what is perceived. How are you viewing this? How are you thinking about this? How are you interpreting it? What's that lens? What's that mindset? What's that filter that everything that is in the what is sort of trickling up through? But then there's also the plane, or the layer of what's possible. And we don't know what's possible, right? Our minds can do many things, but there's certainly maybe a limit, but we don't yet know where those limits are. And I think opening up a little bit to that plane, opening up to possibility, opening up to not knowing, but also being okay with that is, I think, a really powerful place, and something to consider.
Well, thank you. On that beautiful note, we have to end today's programs. My heartfelt thanks to Parul, to Martin, and to Ali for guiding us through a really very deep, rich, and inspiring conversation. Our next program will be in 2 weeks, and we are fortunate to have Dr. David Spiegel as our guest, and the program again will be hosted by Martin and Parul. So thank you. From Iceland to across the bay in Alameda, thank you all for spending an hour with us. And I hope you have a very good day and hope you will join us again in a couple of weeks.